have this webinar for you so that you could have a chance to take a look at one of our tools that lives within our data quality management suite. We're building out a suite of products, and this one is called Monitor. I just did want to mention one housekeeping note. The attendees aren't able to actually speak on the call. Well, you can speak, but no one can hear you. So if you just have any questions that you'd like to ask, there's a chat window. So if you want to post your questions in the chat window, then we should be able to see those. And then at the end, we'll try to answer any of those questions that we can. Okay. So first of all, I wanted to talk just a little bit about Pinnacle. So depending on which arms of Pinnacle you've worked with, you may or may not be aware of all three of the core parts of our business. Those of you who have worked with us on 3E projects probably are familiar with our implementation consultants. We do finance processes, systems, risk processes and systems, so that's Intap Open, data engineering, those people that worked with my team on conversions. We also have an arm that does change management from a project services perspective. We have the software development arm, which we're going to talk about a lot more today. So we have tools that we've been developing, other products that don't necessarily, they cover areas that TR and Intap, some of our other partners, don't touch. So those are the types of pieces of software that we're developing. And then our managed services team, which we're also going to talk about a little bit today. So managed services, we can take care of as little or as much of your software as you'd like. So once you get into a business as usual state, maybe you'd like to bring us in to kind of keep things running, keep the lights on, monitor things, like the monitor tool we're going to talk about today. And then, you can see that we have our partnerships with Thomson Reuters, both on the enterprise and 3E side, Intap, Microsoft, I manage LexisNexis. And this is just a slide that kind of demonstrates the breadth of Pinnacle, that we've grown to about 85 consultants worldwide. And then we have a large geographic footprint, lots of different types of firms, lots of projects that we work on. So just to give you some awareness for how Pinnacle has grown over the last few years. And I also wanted to talk about our kind of the series of these webinars. So, just a little while ago, we worked on a webinar that we presented for entities and sites, some other objects. That was back at the end of October. This one that we're going to talk about today is called Keeping Things as They Should Be. So how to maintain the consistency of your data. And then we'll get to a baking quality into addresses presentation. It's not scheduled yet, but sometime in early 2020. So hopefully, if that's of interest to you, then you'll join us for that one also. And our presenters for today, like I said, my name is Beau Lynch, and so I lead the 3E practice in the US. Paul Knox is my partner for this presentation. He leads our product development teams, and he's based in the UK. So in this webinar, we're going to be covering our application data monitoring tool. So what we're going to demonstrate for you in a few minutes is a tool that enables you to monitor any of the data in your firm. It's system agnostic, doesn't necessarily get tied to one system, but it allows you to monitor either data items in one particular system or across systems, as many systems as you'd like. So let's talk about some of the data problems that brought about the need for these types of tools. So most of our law firms have complex systems. You have data residing in a whole bunch of different databases across your firm. There are, you have a PMS system, you have an intake system, maybe you have a marketing system, you have all the different cost recovery systems. They all need like lists of matters, lists of timekeepers. You have BI reporting. You want all those things to kind of tie together. And so because we have all those different systems, then we have sometimes data inconsistencies. So even though we've, we all try to work to build those integrations and make them perfect and seamless and make sure we cover all the error handling kind of situations that we can come up with. We may be assuming that everything's working as it should, but it's a lot more comforting to be able to check that, to be able to look and see, like, is everything in sync? Do we have the same number of timekeepers that we expect to have in all these other systems? Do they all match? Or if they don't match, is there a good reason that they don't match? Same with matter numbers, client numbers, balances, transactional data, all those types of things. And so the problem is that typically they're not 100% in sync. And so, maybe sometimes the definition of the data is the trouble. Like we can say, oh yeah, we have all the matters in 3E and we have all the matters that came from in-depth open, but maybe we don't have all the matters listed in our cost recovery system. Maybe there's a good reason for that. Maybe you don't move your non-billable matters over into those systems. But we have to be really careful about kind of the definitions of the data to make sure that we've got all the same things across systems. Maybe one system says doubtful is included as we calculate what's open AR, and another system doesn't include doubtful. So that's fine that they're different, but it'd be nice to have some SQL checks that run against those different systems and see how they compare. There can be a lot of causes for the bad data. I'll call it bad data. It's not necessarily all bad. Maybe it's just inconsistent. But maybe when you went to do your conversion, let's say you were going from some legacy system to 3E, maybe the data wasn't in great shape before it was converted. Maybe there's some bugs in one of the systems that you have operating in your environment, or maybe there's a bug in a customization. Plus, users, they're people too. So they may not always enter the data exactly like each other, or maybe they don't follow like what your intent was for a certain field in a certain database. Then the effects are, you sometimes have like summary tables not adding up to the details that support them. Differences in different tables don't balance to each other. Maybe your subledger doesn't balance up to the control accounts in your general ledger. Your BI system isn't really reporting the same numbers that another system is. And then the results are that you actually have a real cost. Some of the costs can be things like an account's out of balance. Maybe you're sending out bills that don't include all the details that should have been on them, or your firm is making decisions based on some bad data. People are kind of spending time chasing an issue. Lots of times, those issues kind of snowball, and lots and lots of people get involved, and that just kind of wastes money. And then I think one of the biggest costs is about reputation. So if you're in IT, or if you're in finance, or if you're one of the owners of one of these systems, then people kind of stop trusting it. If they get an answer that doesn't match another system, then they feel like, well, then I just need to spend a lot of time proving first that I can trust these numbers before we actually go making any decisions about them. So now I'll pass the ball over to my partner in crime, Paul. Let's see.
Thanks, Beau.
Sure. Okay, Paul, you got the ball.
Okay. So actually, Beau, I should just mention, do cut in if you think I'm going to overrun, because I've got quite a lot to cover here.
Sure.
Sure. Okay. So thanks, Beau. So what's the solution? Discipline monitoring. What does that mean? You have to get into the habit of checking your data, and it's got to be done frequently if you're going to have any chance of catching those issues before they turn into major problems. Of course, we've all got day jobs, and performing manual checks is just not practical. So you need some tools to make it a bit easier. So Pinnacle Monitor is a product that we've got that allows you to schedule checks to be run frequently, and so enforce that discipline. Pretty much any logical test can be encapsulated as a check, including comparisons of data across multiple systems. The results or issues are stored in a database and made available via dashboards and reports, which I'll demonstrate shortly. You can also specify responsible individuals to be notified of any new issues found. Now, some of you may have in-house resources available to write the checks necessary and manage that process for yourselves. But if not, Pinnacle can help. So in a nutshell, Monitor performs checks automatically for you, and it does so regularly. I'm sorry, guys, are you seeing a little thing on my screen? I'll move it to one side.
Oh, that's fine.
Yes, fine. So it does it regularly. And of course, the benefit there is that you'll know about those potential problems before users start picking up the phone and start calling you about them. So the BAU monitoring is an obvious use case, but there are other possible uses for Monitor. For example, you can use it while preparing for a migration. So point the monitor at your current system to identify any issues that are likely to cause problems during or post-migration. You can point it at a UAT system that you're using during your trial migration to identify any issues that have arisen during the migration process or have been introduced by virtue of the testing that you're running against that system. And once you've gone live, you can point it at your production system and look for those pieces of incorrect data, duplicates within the system, and consistency and completeness between it and other systems. And of course, if you see a new type of problem, you can write a new check and schedule it. So what does it look like? What I'm going to show you is a dashboard and a report, and then I'll move on to the administration side of things. So this is our standard dashboard. That's right out of the way a little bit further. And it's split into 4 quadrants. The top row here is focused on the current state of affairs. And on the bottom here, we see a trend over time. On the left half of the page, we're showing the number of checks that have been run. And over on the right here, we're showing the number of issues that those checks found. Right up at the top, we've got some report level filters. So you might only be interested, in this case, I'm only looking at 3E data sources, but I could switch to other data sources to have a look at the results there. I can choose only to look at certain categories of check. I've created a category called balancing checks, where I've got my balancing checks defined, or my data integrity checks. Or I can look at responsibility groups. Now, I should let you know what these are. These are things that you define within the configuration tool within the system, and they are to define particular areas of the system that individuals or groups of individuals within your firm have responsibility for. So the idea is that you put those particular users in those groups. You can optionally define email notifications that they're going to receive, the new issues found in those areas, and we can subdivide those large areas into smaller ones, and I'll show you that in a moment. But at this level, we can focus in on a particular group. So perhaps the billing team are only really interested in billing related issues, and we can see they've got a few to look at there. Or the client accounts team. Well, they've got a very rosy picture, nothing for them to do. All their checks have been run without issue. So let's come back to the content here. So as you can see, we've got a breakdown by responsibility group, both for checks and for outstanding issues. For checks, we split them into those checks that have returned issues in the green, and those that haven't returned any issues. So these are all the good ones in the green, and those that have returned some issues in the orange. And you can see as I click on any segment or bar in any of the charts, we've got cross filtering switched on, so we can see out of those, for example, 641 billing checks, how they came out in terms of the number run and the number of issues found. Over on the right, for our issues, we split them into high, medium, and low severities, which are automatically determined when we get the results back from the check. And on a particular responsibility group, I can drill down from that group and look at the further subdivisions by responsibility area. And this is what I was referring to earlier. So these are subdivisions that I've created within that particular group and allocated checks to those particular responsibility areas. So this shows me that I've got 153 high priority issues found within the bill trend time responsibility area, and I can drill further into those to see the actual checks that were run. So the names of the checks, their severity, and the number of issues found. Now I can drill into this a little bit further, but in the interest of time, there's a few particular cases that I'd like to show you under master data. So master data, I've only got 4 checks, but it's returned 59 issues. So let's have a look at those issues. And I know there's only a few, so I'll drill straight into the check level here. Now the first one is a duplicate address check. And I've got 19 possible duplicates. So from this level, I can now drill in to see the results. And I see my 19 addresses all listed there. And for each address, I get an indication of how many similar addresses that we found using the logic in this particular check. So for this one, it's got 6 similar addresses. I'll drill in to see those 6 addresses, and I can see they're all slightly different. They are separate addresses. They've got different indexes. They've also got different organization names, but they appear to be at the same premises. At least there's a good chance. Some of them are missing pieces of information, and some additional pieces of information are not entirely consistent. But the way I've written the check, it's been able to determine that these addresses are most likely the same. Now, of course, what you do about that is the next step. The tool allows you to identify those differences. In the previous webinar, we talked about using entity merge, which is another product that we've developed, which allows you to merge addresses, and that might be appropriate in this particular case. In the next webinar, we're going to be talking about address cleansing, and that might be appropriate for the cases where we see we've got pieces of missing information. And another tool in that webinar coming up is something that will allow you to improve the quality of your addresses at the point of capture. Anyway, for the purpose of this demo, I'll go back to my list here and see that we've got 3 other similar checks. In this case, they're all looking at INTAP and 3E, and they found differences between timekeepers, matters, and clients. So let's have a look at the timekeeper one. And I can see I've got 17 differences. The first 2, record 007 and 015, occurs in both systems, so it's present in both, but it has differences. The first one in 2 particular columns and the second one in bill name. So let's have a look at that. I can drill further in at this point, and I can see both defined, or rather defined in both systems. They have the same display name, but there's been a change, or at least there is a discrepancy between the bill names. Now this might be because there's a process in INTAP where somebody has changed the name and it's not yet filtered through into 3E. It might be an indication that there's something wrong with that integration, or it might be that somebody's gone in to the wrong system, perhaps directly in 3E, and changed the name. In either case, there is an issue there to be investigated and resolved, and you probably want to do it before the next bill goes out for this person, especially if they're a partner. The rest of the results here indicate that we've got some records that are only in 3E and some records that are only in INTAP. So all of this points to some integration problem. But now you have the information available. Excuse me. and you've been notified about it very quickly. So any of the problems that have arisen have happened, for example, within the last day, if you're running this check daily. So it's fresh in people's minds, and hopefully it's easier to solve. So let's go back to have a look at clients and matters, and I'll just have a look at a similar result here. Again, we've got some records that exist only in one of the systems, and a couple of differences at the top. Let's have a look at this 0001 client. So it's got a difference in their display names, again, between Intap Open and 3E. And again, similar integration issues might be behind this. So we need to investigate further and sort those out. If I flip over to have a look at the matter results, I can see, actually, I recognize that client number. Let's have a look at that matter. And there we see it's a similar problem. It's a related problem. The client name change hasn't filtered through. At least it's consistent within the individual systems, but the matter change names have also not filtered through from one system to the other. And then, of course, if you had noticed the client issue in isolation, you might have fixed that and not thought about the matter one. But of course, if you're looking for both issues, then you'll know about both and you'll be able to fix it in both places. Excuse me. Okay. Oh, there is one thing I forgot to show you there, which was once you've resolved those issues, you need to be able to record the fact that you've resolved them. So you've got an audit trail of that fact. So for example, if, if on the timekeeper issues I go and say fixed by doing blah, blah, blah. And then refresh my report, that's no longer outstanding. Of course, if I haven't really fixed that issue, it will come back into the list the next time the check is run. There will be cases where you see an issue that's been raised, but actually you understand the problem and it's not a risk. So you choose to hide that. And what that means is that you don't want to see that result next time. So again, it disappears from your outstanding list, but what happens is the check continues to run next time, and if any new issues that it hasn't seen before that wasn't in that set of issues that it found before, it will tell you about those, but it won't remind you about the issues that you've already said that you're not interested in. Okay, so that's the standard dashboard, and you can use that for any checks that are run by the monitor. But in some cases, you might have specific use cases where more specific visualization is needed. So by way of an example, I have a set of scripts that were already being run manually. I've loaded those into Monitor, and since there was already an established style for presenting those results, I've put them together in a set of reports to mimic that style. So what we're seeing here is a summary report. It's split up by module, but it's showing the number of checks that were run and the number of issues found. Terminology is different, obviously, and we're getting some additional information. I can drill into that and see the categories and the tables that the checks are being run against. So here is a list of the checks that returned issues. I can see how many issues each returned. I can see the definition of that check. And I can see the results of that check. So in this case, it's quite straightforward. We're missing a first name because these aren't real people or the accounts are being reused. In other cases, I might not want to see all results, so this particular check returned more than 1,500 rows, but I've chosen to group those together by the field that I'm interested in this case, the title. So I'm interested in what are the invalid titles. Interestingly, though, the check definition is still very general. It's just returning all timekeepers that don't have a valid title. So that's an interesting.
Beau, just as a time check, we've got like 5 minutes.
Okay, let me steam forward then. That's about it on that way of showing that particular rendition of results. As we've seen. So, how does it work? So this is going to be quick. So we've got the Pinnacle Monitor service that runs, checks what schedules are present in the monitoring database, and runs those checks against the target systems. It then stores those back into the monitoring database so that they're available for dashboards and reports that we've seen. It also emails out the results, providing we've configured it to do that. We've got a configuration app that again talks to the database, and that's how you set up the checks and schedules and the other configuration information. And we've got another app that will be available shortly to extend the functionality of the dashboard. Now, the one thing to mention here is that all of this runs within your environment, so it's secure. The only thing that's leaving your environment, and again, that's down to your choice, whether you choose to configure emails going to Pinnacle Managed Services or not, and how much information you want to include in those emails. Everything else is within your environment. The other thing to mention is that, as Beau alluded to before, all the core components within Monitor are system agnostic. There's no code within the Monitor service or any of this core components that knows anything about particular systems. All of the system-specific stuff is in the check definition. Or if you want to configure one of these satellite databases, which is a useful way of putting complex code and shared configuration information somewhere other than your target system. Okay, so let me just show you briefly, because we are running out of time, the configuration app. So there are obviously several tables that you can configure to do with some of the things we've looked at, such as responsibility groups. And you can see that you can set up individuals within those groups and configurations to control how emails and when emails are sent. But we've also got the place where we set up schedules. And this is where we define the schedule and say which checks we want to run as part of that schedule. and this is where we set up the checks. And as you can see, we're split into a number of, we split the information across a number of tabs. We've got some basic information here, name, description. We've got how we've classified it. So I've talked about some of that as we've been going along. The command itself, so this is the bit of SQL that's going to be run, and is in this case quite a simple piece. How we want to handle the results coming back, and how long we want to retain the information that we've captured. If it's a comparison check, then what is the other data source, and what is the command that we want to run against that data source, and then how we want to schedule it. So let's, I think, no, there's one more slide. How are we doing for time? Oh, no.
We're pretty much out of time.
Okay. In that case, let me hand over to Beau. Actually, Beau, should we stay on the screen just to save a few seconds?
Sure, that sounds good. So you guys can see that we've launched this monitoring tool at a few places. Obviously at Pinnacle, because we need it. We ourselves use 3E. We used Intap Time. We use 3E Time Capture, Intap Deal Cloud. We have a bunch of integrations ourselves, so we need to use it ourselves. And then we have some other firms that have used the tool for various purposes too, And then, Paul, you want to move to the next slide? We've got expertise in-house. So like Paul mentioned, you guys can develop whatever SQL statements you want to compare whatever systems you have in your environment. But we know about a lot of those systems, so we're happy to help you write some of that. Our managed services team can actually take over the whole thing and, go in and check what's being monitored and, present them to you and say, hey, how would you like to fix this? I just noticed this popped up today. Or you can do it all yourselves, and you can just use this as little or as much as you'd like. And then, Paul, if you want to jump. Yep. So we've got our webinar series continuing on into 2020. Baking quality into addresses is one of the topics that we'll be covering, and then improving data quality in general. So if you want to check back into the schedule to see when those webinars finally get scheduled, and if you don't see them scheduled and you're curious, you can contact us. There's some contact information depending on where you are geographically, or feel free to reach out to any of us whenever you want. If any of this is kind of, teased you a little bit, I know it's a short webinar. It's only 30 minutes or 31 minutes now, sorry. I want to be respectful of your time, but if you'd like more information, then definitely get in touch with us, and we can set up like a longer, more detailed call where it's more interactive and you can see exactly what you want to see about everything that we have here. And there were a couple of questions that I saw in the panel. I think we covered them. I answered them in the panel, but one of them was asking about the slide deck, and yes, we can send that out. I think Cyril's going to send that out, or maybe make it available to you to download. One of the other questions was, is obviously Power BI based. Is it a requirement for the company to have Power BI Pro or Premium licenses to run the solution? I honestly am not a licensing expert, but I can say that those reports can be deployed in SSRS if you'd like, or obviously the ones that looked like Power BI, they are written in Power BI. So, but I couldn't answer that as an expert in licensing. And then the other question was whether or not it was hosted internally or externally, and it would be hosted internally, as Paul mentioned, internally to your firm. And the only piece going externally would be if you chose to email us some results or something like that. Okay. Paul, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I think you covered it. Thanks, Beau. And sorry for overrunning, but thank you everyone for listening.
No problem. Thank you guys.